Hello, and welcome to the screencast on the executive branch. The executive branch is the one in charge of upholding the laws. To execute means to perform or to do. And in this case of American government, it means to have the highest power of making sure the laws are followed. The executive branch does not actually make laws. That is the job of the legislative branch. Of course, the president has a lot of informal power to influence the legislative to make laws that he or she agrees with. The executive branch has three main parts: the president, the vice president, and the cabinet. As of right now, the president, as you all know, is Barack Obama. The vice president is a man named Joe Biden, who used to be a senator from Delaware. And the cabinet, which you may not be aware of, is made up of 15 top advisors from the various departments of government who meet with the president and vice president to offer advice and also to run the day-to-day operations of those departments. The president is obviously the most famous element of this branch. The qualifications for the presidency are that he or she must be at least 35 years old and a natural-born citizen of the United States, meaning not an immigrant who becomes American. The president serves a 4-year term and can serve 2 terms at most. The president begins his or her term by taking the oath of office. An oath is a formal promise. The oath, as you can see here, is, "I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." What you should notice here is that the President's primary obligation is to defend the Constitution. It is not necessarily to represent the people or to lead the military or anything. The primary role of the President is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. The presidential election occurs every 4 years, on the first Tuesday in November. The way the president is elected is through the Electoral College, which is complicated enough that it will need to be explained separately. Basically, however, each candidate is trying to win a majority of the votes in each state and thereby get that state's electoral votes. The winner of Minnesota, for example, would get 10 electoral votes. There are 538 votes total, so the goal is to get to 270. Again, this will be explained more later. The president has quite a lot of power in the United States, at least compared to systems in Japan and the UK, for example, which have prime ministers. The first of the 4 major powers I'm going to talk about is as Commander-in-Chief. Commander-in-Chief means that the president heads the Army, the Navy, the use of nuclear weapons, etc., basically anything that refers to how a war is waged. Technically, the president does not have the power to declare war. The legislative branch has that right. But the president can authorize the use of troops in foreign countries and has broad powers to respond to emergency situations. Once a war is declared, the president has a great deal of authority to do whatever he or she feels is necessary in the defense of the United States. The second presidential power I'm going to talk about is the right to veto bills from the Congress. A veto means a rejection of a bill. The Senate and the House can make a bill with a majority vote, 50% plus 1, but for it to become a law, it must either get the president's signature or get support of 2/3 of both houses. If the president fails to sign it, it's called a veto. It then would go back to the House and Senate to try to get that bigger majority of 2/3. But that's quite hard to get these days, so the president has, in effect, a lot of power to reject bills that he or she disagrees with and never have them actually become law. The third presidential power I'm going to talk about is the right to represent the United States in relations with other countries. It also includes the ability to make treaties, or in other words, agreements with other countries, and along with other parts of the executive branch, the president pretty much has final say over foreign policy. In some cases, the Senate needs to approve these decisions that the president might make, but in some cases, approval is not needed. A fourth major power for the presidency and for the executive branch is over appointments, meaning the right to place people in high positions in the government. The president nominates the Supreme Court justices, federal judges, and ambassadors. The president also gets to nominate people for other positions in the executive branch, like the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and so on. All of these nominations, however, must be approved by the Senate. The vice president is elected along with the president. The vice president actually has very few powers. The main role is to become president if the president dies or is unable to fulfill his or her duties. The vice president's second main role is to preside, meaning watch over, the Senate and cast a vote if there is a 50-50 tie. Other than a few other ceremonial tasks, that is it for the vice president. Of course, the VP has a lot of informal influence over other people in the government. The final part of the executive branch is the cabinet. There are 15 departments in the government that are in charge of the different aspects of running the country. For example, the Department of Agriculture manages laws and policies concerning farms, while the Department of Defense is in charge of military matters. Others are Department of Education, Justice Department, Department of Energy, and so on. The heads of these departments advise the President, and the group is given the name Cabinet. It is important to understand how the executive branch has power compared to the other two branches. As mentioned earlier, the President has power over the legislative in that he or she can veto bills. At the same time, the legislative branch has powers over the executive. For one, the legislative branch can also override the President's veto. Second, Congress has the power to impeach the President, which means to remove him or her from office. The legislative branch also has to approve the President's nominations for various offices, plus the legislative has the right to declare war. As for the judicial branch, the executive branch can nominate judges for the Supreme Court and for other federal courts. In return, the judicial branch can rule the President's actions unconstitutional and thereby make them invalid. The main points to remember about the executive branch are: number one, the executive is in charge of upholding the laws, not making sure that they're constitutional. Number two, there are three parts. People usually remember the first one, president, but often forget the other two, the vice president and the cabinet. 3, the president has 4 main powers. Commander-in-chief, that's over the military stuff. Veto power is the right to reject a bill that the Congress makes. Foreign affairs, the president has a lot of power and influence over relations with other countries. And number 4, appointments, or the right to place people in other parts of the government. Meanwhile, the vice president has very few powers, mostly waiting around and then casting a tie once every blue moon if there's a deadlock in the Senate. Number 5, the cabinet advises the president and runs the various departments. They don't have any formal powers beyond what the president gives them in those departments. And number 6, while the president is very powerful and very famous, presidential powers are actually constrained by the other two branches. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.